Welcome back to Her Secret Diaries, the place where forgotten memories find their voice and ordinary lives reveal extraordinary truths. If you believe that the smallest objects can carry the biggest stories, you're in the right place. Today's diary entry is about something thin, faded, and easily overlooked. Grandma's library card. She kept it in the back pocket of her old brown purse. Not in the wallet where the important things were. Not with her ID, or the little folded photos of her children when they were young. The library card stayed in a hidden compartment behind a broken zipper, tucked inside an envelope that once held a birthday card from 1998. No one knew it was there. No one, except her. The purse itself had lived through decades. The leather had cracked along the handles, and the clasp sometimes refused to close, snapping shut only after a stubborn second try. But she refused to replace it. Her daughter had offered her a new one last year, sleek, modern, lightweight. She smiled and said, "This one still carries what I need." And it did. Her name on the library card had nearly faded away. The letters were once printed in bold black ink, but time had turned them into a soft gray whisper. The edges were frayed. The barcode on the back was scratched, barely but she never forgot the number. She could still recite it from memory. Every Tuesday at 10 in the morning, she would walk to the public library 3 blocks away. The sidewalks weren't as smooth as they used to be. Some stones tilted upward like old teeth. But she walked carefully, one step at a time, cane tapping gently against the pavement. The automatic doors would slide open, and she would pause just inside. She always paused. Not because she was tired. Because she was grateful. The smell of paper, dust, and polished wood felt like home. It wasn't loud in the library. It was never loud. But it wasn't silent either. There were whispers. Soft footsteps. Pages turning. A printer humming in the distance. Life, in its quietest form. She would make her way to the front desk, pulling the envelope from her purse. The librarians, sometimes young, sometimes older, depending on the shift, would smile and say, "Good morning, Mrs. Hale," and she would reply, "Good morning. I'm here to see what the world has to say today." She didn't say borrow books, she said see what the world has to say. Because to her, books weren't objects. They were voices. She didn't grow up with many. Her childhood had been loud in the wrong ways. A small house with too many arguments and too little space. Her father believed books were distractions. Her mother believed survival mattered more than stories. There wasn't time for imagination when there were bills to pay and mouths to feed. So she learned early how to swallow her curiosity. But she never lost it. When she was 12, her teacher handed her a worn copy of a novel and said, "You might like this." It was the first book she ever owned, even if only for a week. She read it under her blanket at night with a flashlight she hid beneath her pillow. She read about places she had never seen, people who faced struggles worse than hers, and somehow survived. She finished it in 3 nights. And when she returned it, she felt something crack open inside her chest, a door. The first time she held a library card in her hand, she felt like someone had handed her a key. Not to a building, but to a future. Years passed. She married young, had children, worked long hours, cooked dinners, folded laundry, stayed up late mending socks and balancing grocery budgets. Life was practical. Life was heavy. But every Tuesday, she escaped. The library became her sanctuary. Sometimes she read novels. Sometimes books about faraway countries she would never visit. She read about art, about science, about history. She read poetry when the world felt too sharp. She never went to college. But she educated herself in quiet corners between responsibilities. Her children remember her with a book in her lap. They remember asking her questions and hearing answers that seemed deeper than other mothers' answers. Why is the sky blue? She didn't say, "Because it is." She said, "Let's find out." And they would walk together to the library, small hands gripping her fingers. The librarian back then was an older man with silver hair and round glasses. He noticed how she treated books with respect, almost reverence. One afternoon, as she checked out a stack of 5, he said, "You read like someone who's searching for something." She smiled. "Maybe I am. What are you looking for?" he asked. She thought about it. "A bigger world," she replied. He nodded as if he understood, and maybe he did. Years rolled forward. Her children grew up. The house grew quieter. Her husband passed away one winter morning, leaving behind an empty chair at the dining table and a silence that echoed in every room. Grief is a strange thing. It shrinks your world. The first Tuesday after his funeral, she almost didn't go to the library. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at her purse. The brown leather looked tired. The envelope peeked out from the broken zipper. For a moment, she wondered if reading would feel pointless now, but she went. The automatic doors opened like they always did. The smell wrapped around her like a familiar embrace. She didn't browse that day. She went straight to the poetry section. She didn't want facts. She wanted comfort. She borrowed 3 books and carried them home like fragile treasures. That night, she read aloud to an empty room, not because she thought he could hear her, but because she needed to hear herself. Words filled the silence, and slowly, the silence softened. Her library card became more than a habit. It became a lifeline when her eyesight began to fade. She switched to large print books. When holding heavy hardcovers hurt her wrists, she borrowed paperbacks. When walking became difficult, she requested books to be placed on hold, so she wouldn't have to search the shelves. She adapted. She refused to let go. The younger librarians sometimes offered to help her sign up for digital reading apps. "You can download books on a tablet," they explained gently. She would smile and shake her head. "I like turning pages," she said. "It reminds me I'm moving forward." One rainy afternoon, her granddaughter visited unexpectedly. The girl was 16, headphones around her neck, eyes constantly flicking to her phone. She watched her grandmother carefully slide the library card across the counter. "You still use that old thing?" she asked. Her grandmother laughed softly. "Of course. Why not just buy books online?" "Because this card," she said, holding it up, "reminds me that stories belong to everyone." Her granddaughter didn't fully understand. Not yet. That day, they walked through the aisles together. The teenager drifted toward the young adult section, flipping through colorful covers. Her grandmother wandered slowly through classics. After a while, the girl sat down beside her. "What's your favorite book?" she asked. Her grandmother thought for a long time. "That's like asking which memory I'd like to keep if I had to choose only one," she said. "Okay," the girl grinned. "Which memory would you keep?" She closed her eyes. "The first time I realized I wasn't alone in how I felt." Her granddaughter tilted her head. "A book did that." "Yes." They checked out books together that day. It became their thing. Every other Tuesday, the girl would meet her there after school. Sometimes they didn't talk much. Sometimes they talked about everything. The grandmother noticed the girl was quieter than she used to be. She noticed the way her smiles didn't always reach her eyes. So one afternoon, she handed her a small notebook. "What's this for?" the girl asked. "For your own stories," she replied. "I'm not a writer." "You don't have to be. You just have to be honest." The girl shrugged but slipped it into her backpack. Weeks later, she returned with tear-stained pages. Her grandmother didn't read them. She didn't need to. "I'm proud of you," she said anyway. "For what?" "For not swallowing your feelings." The girl looked confused. Her grandmother smiled softly. "I did that for years." "It's heavy." The library card, thin and worn, had given her language for things she once kept buried, and now it was passing that gift on. One winter morning, she arrived to find the doors locked. A sign hung in the window: "Renovations. Closed for 2 weeks." 2 weeks felt like an eternity. She stood there longer than she needed to. A young employee inside noticed her and hurried to the door. "We're so sorry," he said through the glass. We'll reopen soon. She nodded. It's all right, she replied. I suppose even homes need repairs. When she turned to leave, she felt something unexpected. Fear. What if one day the doors didn't reopen? What if libraries became relics of the past? What if her card became nothing more than plastic without purpose? The thought unsettled her, so when the library reopened, she brought cookies. She handed them to the staff with a shy smile. For keeping the doors open, she said, years later. When she fell ill, the library noticed her absence. Tuesdays passed without the tap of her cane. The librarians whispered to one another. Has anyone seen Mrs. Hale? One afternoon, her granddaughter walked in alone. She approached the counter and placed the old library card down gently. She wanted you to have this, she said. The head librarian frowned. Why? She said it opened enough doors for her. Maybe it can open some for someone else. The staff gathered around the worn card. It looked fragile, but it had carried decades of curiosity, resilience, and quiet rebellion. The librarian shook his head softly. This belongs to her. The granddaughter smiled through tears. She said stories don't belong to one person. A week later, they framed the card, not because it was valuable in money, but because it was valuable in meaning. They placed it on the wall behind the desk, with a small plaque. Grandma's library card, a reminder that it's never too late to begin. The granddaughter visits every Tuesday. Now sometimes she borrows books. Sometimes she just sits. Sometimes she writes. She keeps her own library card in her wallet. Crisp and new. But she carries something older in her heart. The understanding that knowledge is freedom, that imagination is resistance, that quiet spaces can save loud lives, and somewhere between the shelves, between the dust and the ink and the turning pages, a woman's legacy lingers, not in monuments, not in headlines, but in the soft beep of a scanner, in the sliding open of automatic doors, in the courage it takes to keep learning, even when the world tells you to stop. Grandma's library card was never just plastic. It was proof that no matter how small your world begins, you can widen it one page at a time. And that is today's secret from Her Secret Diaries. Sometimes the thinnest card carries the heaviest story. But the story of Grandma's library card did not end on the wall behind the desk. In many ways, that was only the beginning. After the card was framed, something unexpected happened. People started asking about it. At first it was just curious glances. A mother waiting with her toddler would read the plaque out loud. A college student studying for exams would pause, backpack half-sipped, and squint at the faded name. An elderly man would remove his glasses, lean closer, and nod quietly as if he understood something unspoken. Who was she? They would ask, and the librarians would tell them. Not every detail. Not every Tuesday. Not every cookie she baked or poem she borrowed, but enough. Enough to paint the picture of a woman who refused to let her world shrink. The story traveled faster than anyone expected. It was mentioned during a school field trip. A teacher pointed to the framed card and told her students, "This is what lifelong learning looks like." A local reporter wrote a short piece about it in the community newspaper. Nothing dramatic. Just a gentle story about a woman and her devotion to books. But something about it struck a nerve. Because in a world that moved quickly, that story moved slowly, and people were hungry for slow. Her granddaughter, who had once rolled her eyes at the old purse and the cracked leather handles, now carried that same purse on her shoulder. She repaired it carefully, replaced the lining, fixed the zipper. She kept her own library card in the front pocket, but in the back pocket, where the old envelope used to rest, she placed a folded piece of paper. On it, she wrote her grandmother's favorite sentence. Let's find out. She didn't realize how deeply those words had rooted themselves inside her until she faced her own crossroads. Her friends were applying to colleges in cities far away. Some knew exactly what they wanted: law, medicine, engineering. She felt uncertain, lost. Even. One Tuesday, she sat beneath the framed card and whispered, "What would you do?" Of course, the card didn't answer. But the library did. She wandered into sections she had never explored before: sociology, psychology, literature, history, education. She read about women who had learned later in life, about teachers who changed entire communities, about authors who began writing after raising children. She realized something powerful. There is no expiration date on curiosity. Her grandmother hadn't needed a classroom to become educated, she needed access and courage. That realization changed everything. Instead of choosing what sounded impressive, she chose what felt meaningful. She decided to study education, not because it was easy, but because she understood, more than most, the impact of a single open door. On the day she received her acceptance letter, she walked straight to the library. She stood beneath the framed card and said softly, "You did this." The librarian overheard her and smiled. "She would be proud." "She already is," the granddaughter replied. Years passed again, as they always do. The library itself began to change. More computers appeared. Fewer encyclopedias lined the shelves. There were digital catalogs, audiobooks, online memberships. But the framed card stayed exactly where it was. Sometimes, during quiet afternoons, the staff would share stories about Mrs. Hale with new employees. "She used to bring lemon cookies," one would say. "She always returned books on time," another would add. "She read poetry out loud." Someone would whisper that the new employees would listen politely at first, but after a few weeks, they understood why the story mattered. It reminded them why their jobs mattered. Libraries are not just buildings, they are bridges. One autumn afternoon, a young boy walked in alone. He looked nervous. He wore worn sneakers and carried a backpack that seemed too heavy for his small shoulders. He approached the desk and stared up at the framed card. "What's that?" he asked. That the librarian knelt to his height. "That," she said gently, "is a reminder of what? That one person can change their life with a library card." He frowned slightly. "It's just plastic." The librarian smiled. "Sometimes, small things hold big power." He thought about that then. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. "My teacher said I need one," he mumbled. A card. The librarian handed him a form. As he filled it out carefully, letter by letter, she felt something familiar. A beginning. When she handed him his brand new library card, his eyes widened. It was shiny, untouched, full of possibility. He looked back at the framed card. "Will mine look like that one day?" "If you use it," she replied. He nodded solemnly. That afternoon, he borrowed his first book, and somewhere, in the quiet hum of the scanner and the whisper of turning pages, a legacy continued. The granddaughter graduated years later. She returned to the same town not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She became a teacher at the elementary school just 5 blocks from the library. On the first day of class, she held up her own library card. "Who here has one?" she asked. Only a few hands went up. "That's going to change." She smiled. Every month, she walked her students to the library. They lined up in pairs, chattering and giggling, unaware that they were participating in something sacred. Before they entered, she always paused, just like her grandmother used to. She would close her eyes for a second and inhale the familiar scent of paper and dust, gratitude, inside. She would point to the framed card and tell the story, not in a dramatic way, just truthfully, about a woman who didn't have much growing up. About how she built her world with borrowed books. About how she believed stories belonged to everyone. Some students listened quietly, some fidgeted, some didn't understand, but a few always did. There was always one child whose eyes softened, whose shoulders straightened, who saw possibility instead of obligation. And that was enough, because change doesn't require everyone, it requires someone. The granddaughter kept the old purse for decades. When it finally began to fall apart beyond repair, she didn't throw it away. She placed it in a small wooden box along with photographs, letters, and the folded paper that read, "Let's find out." Years later, when she herself had silver hair and slower steps, she visited the library less often, but she still went. The framed card remained, the plaque slightly polished from occasional dusting. She would sit in a chair near the desk and watch young readers approach. She would observe parents guiding small hands toward picture books. She would listen to teenagers debating novels, and she would smile. One afternoon, a young librarian approached her. "Are you related to Mrs. Hale?" she asked carefully. "Yes," she replied. The librarian's eyes brightened. "We still talk about her." The granddaughter chuckled. She would have liked that. "She changed this place," the librarian said. The granddaughter shook her head gently. "No, this place changed her." They both understood something profound in that exchange. Transformation goes both ways. Near the end of her life, the granddaughter requested something specific. She asked that her own library card not be framed. Instead, she asked that it be given to a child who couldn't afford the registration fee. "It should stay in motion," she explained. "And what about your grandmother's?" someone asked. She looked toward the desk. "It stays," she said, "because it reminds us where motion begins." And so it did. Years turned into decades. The world outside the library evolved new technologies, new distractions, new ways of consuming stories. But inside, certain rituals remained unchanged. The quiet shuffle of feet, the careful stamping of due dates. The shared understanding that knowledge is not reserved for the privileged. It is offered to the curious. And every Tuesday, without fail, someone new pauses beneath the framed card. Some read the plaque, some simply glance at it. But for a few, it plants a seed, a thought, a question. What if I used this? What if I kept going? What if I widened my world? Grandma's library card was never famous. It never appeared in museums or auctions. It was never worth money. But it was worth momentum. It carried a woman through grief, loneliness, and limitation. It connected generations. It turned silence into dialogue. It transformed a building into a sanctuary. And perhaps most importantly, it proved something simple and revolutionary. Access changes destiny. Not overnight, not dramatically, but quietly. One book at a time. One Tuesday at a time. One curious child at a time. So if you have a library card tucked somewhere in your wallet, if it's been months since you've used it, if life feels heavy or narrow or loud, remember her. Remember the woman who treated a small piece of plastic like a passport, who walked carefully across uneven sidewalks because inside those automatic doors waited possibility, who read poetry into an empty room just to soften the silence, who told her granddaughter, "You don't have to be a writer. You just have to be honest." And maybe, just maybe, pull your card out, hold it, look at it. Ask yourself what doors it could still open. Because stories don't belong to the young. Curiosity doesn't belong to the wealthy. And growth doesn't belong to the fearless. It belongs to anyone willing to say, "Let's find out." And that is the quiet power behind Grandma's library card. A thin rectangle of plastic, a lifetime of expansion. A reminder, from Her Secret Diaries, that the smallest tools can build the largest worlds.